Okay, so welcome to video number 2. In this video, we're going to learn how to forecast seasonal data. So, as we've talked about before, and I know I'm going to sound redundant, but step 1 is graph your data. I'll move this so you can see a little bit better. And then remember, it's hard to see if you have any seasonality, basically because the x-axis really isn't set up to do that, right? So first, go to the select data, and then you want to edit the horizontal axes label, okay? And here, just highlight year and quarter. Excel can handle that. And what's going on? There you go, Excel. Hit OK. And now I have my years on the bottom and my quarters on the top. And now I can start to look at, quarter 2 is always high. Quarter 2 is always high, right? And so now you can start looking at, do I have some seasonality? And in fact, I do. Q2 is always high and Q4 is always low. And what I mean by high or low is, of course, insert my trend line. And you're going to see that this thing is pretty flat. Format this so you can see a little better. Okay, there we go. Right? So this is what I mean. Q2 is always above the trend line, and Q4 is always below, and so this would suggest that we have some seasonality. So how do we address that? Well, we run another regression, and here is your regression equation. So y hat is going to be our predicted sales. Now, beta naught, this is no longer an intercept. So let me back up for a minute. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create dummy variables. That's what these are. Q1 in time period t is what we call a dummy variable. Q2 in time period t is a dummy variable, and then so is Q3. So let me do those first. So here's Q1, Q2, and, oops, got to spell it right, Q3. So what do we mean by dummy variable? Well, a dummy variable only takes on two numbers, a 0 or a 1. So if this observation is in Q1, then I give this a 1, right? If it's not in Q1, then it would be a 0. So here's quarter 2, I would put in a 0. Here's quarter 3, I would put in a 0. Here's quarter 4, I put in a 0. And then the same thing here. If this observation belongs in quarter 2, I would put in a 1. 0 otherwise. So here, I'm going to have something that looks like this. And then Q3, 1 if it's observations in quarter 3, 0 otherwise. And I got that. Okay? You'll notice that I've left out Q4. You always leave out one of your time periods. That is because your beta naught now will actually be your Q4 dummy variable. So beta naught is no longer an intercept. Beta naught will now be the sales that are in your left out time period. So in this case, beta naught will represent the average sales in quarter 4. Okay? Now, you don't have to leave out quarter 4. I could have just as easily done this with Q2, Q3, and Q4 and left out Q1. I'm just trying to follow what the book has done. There is no, there's no magic quarter that we always leave out, right? Well, generally speaking, we either leave out Q4 or Q1. Rarely do we leave out Q2 or Q3 because they're right in the middle, all right? But at any rate, you just have to leave out one of your quarters. By the way, that's called the dummy variable trap. If you've got 4 quarters, then you can only have 3 dummy variables, okay? All right, so the reason I wanted to say all this is because all of my x variables are dummy variables, We call this a dummy variable regression. Therefore, this has a different interpretation than our trend regression. If you recall, in our trend regression, we had an intercept and then a slope, right? Here, we're not doing that. It turns out that what we're doing in a dummy variable regression is we're measuring the average sales in the time period that's been left out, and now beta 1 is going to measure the incremental difference between Q4 and Q1. Beta 2 here, or B2, is going to measure the incremental difference between quarter 2 and quarter 4. And then B3 is going to measure the incremental difference in sales between Q4 and Q3. So there are no slopes here. Okay? Why? Because these are dummy variable x's, right? We're not looking at a trend. All right? Okay, so I've rambled on a little bit about that. So you want to set up your dummy variables just like I've done here. And then what you do, obviously, is just copy these down. So copy, paste. Okay, there you go. And now you're ready to run your regression. So sales, right, this is going to be my Y variable. And then your dummy variables, or your quarter variables in this case, are going to be your X's. So we'll go into data, data analysis, regression. Okay, so my Y input range, my sales, and then the X input range, oops, I gotta go down, okay, hit OK, and again, I included the labels, so check the labels, and again, check that box for residuals, and the reason for that, make this big, is because again it predicts everything for us. Okay, so these are our y hats. So what, based on this model, what do we predict our sales will be in quarter 1? Well, notice. Oh, okay, I did that wrong. Notice that they're all 124. Right? Now the idea here is, again, this is why I want you to graph all this. There is no trend line, right? So this thing is flat. So the quarter, what that says is that the quarter 1 sales are expected to be the same value every quarter. So that's what this flat trend line is telling me. And then what the seasonality is telling me is that for whatever reason, right, my Q2 sales are always going to be higher, right, than my average. And then of course Q3 and Q4, well actually Q4, I don't know about Q3, but certainly Q4 is always going to be below. And you can see that, right? So here, Q4, 95, 95, 95, 95, 95. And then look, Q2, 152, 152, 152, one blah, 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 right? So that's picking up that seasonality. So for whatever reason, sales start, these are umbrella sales, if I'm not mistaken, umbrella sales. So they start off at about, let's see, I guess that's actually 125 umbrellas. So, they start off at about 124, 125, and then in the second quarter they jump up, that's the rainy season. And then we get some rain, in the summer, and then here in the fall, they fall off because people don't use umbrellas in the snow. I don't know, right? But that's the seasonality. And that pattern is repeating itself year after year after year. And that's what you see here. Okay, so there you go. That's it. You have just, oops, I'm in the wrong thing. Sorry. You're done. So, again, when you check that residual box, what's nice about that is Excel is providing you with your predicted sales. So, for example, what would my sales be in year 6 in quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4? They would be these 4 numbers. The quarter 1 sales would be 124. The quarter 2 sales would be 152, right? So on and so forth. So I could just copy this over. And there, those would be my predicted umbrella sales for next year. Now, in the last video I said, oh, don't forecast out too far, right? Well, in this regression, in this seasonality or dummy variable regression, it's actually okay to forecast out for a full year, because the idea here is we're assuming that that same trend will continue next year. And so if that is true, then this forecast would be valid. Now, if something changes, and this is why I was telling you guys you always have to graph everything, right? Because if there is a change in that trend, then these would get a little bit dicier. This is, if you go back to last week's video, when I showed you that graph where you kind of had, I think it was gasoline sales, right? Gasoline sales were just kind of moving along, and then poof, they had a big jump, and then they went flat again. So that's the type of stuff you're looking at. So when I'm looking at this chart, it doesn't appear that I've had a break or anything like that. Therefore, my forecast for the next 4 periods is actually probably pretty accurate, because nothing fundamental, nothing has changed in that chart to lead me to think that my forecast is going to be off too much. All right? And then the same thing, it's right here. Same thing, here are my residuals, right? So we could always do the squared residuals. So it's this squared. Okay. And then I can always take the average. So how good of a forecast is this average? Right, and then I like to take the square root, SQRT. This one, it's okay. Obviously we have some pretty big errors or residuals here, right? Negative 15, 12, 14, a couple of negative 15s, a 14, and a 13, right? So this 10, combined with some of the other errors here, looks about right. And yeah, this is a little bit big, but you can get this in this situation, okay? Now, I want to show you, here is my equation, and I wanted to show you this. So this is my point. The intercept, even though it says intercept, it's not. Notice that this 95, that is the sales in Q4, okay? And then I was mentioning earlier that these coefficients, see, these are the incremental difference in sales between Q4 and, say, Q1. And to show you that, look, so what would Q1 sales be? Well, they would be the 95 plus the 29, because it's the incremental difference, and voila. There's my 124. That's exactly how Excel got the 124. And then the same is true for quarter 2. I'm going to take the 95 sales in quarter 4 and add to it the incremental sales in quarter 2. There's my 152, right? Here's quarter 2 sales, 152, 152. And then, of course, finally, Q3 is 95 plus the 26. And lo and behold, there is your 121. Okay? So, we got that. Now, one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about. So yes, this is a regression, and this is exactly how we calculate these. And your book points this out, but I wanted to give this a little bit more attention, because see, this dummy variable regression, all it's doing is calculating average sales in your base group, which in this case is going to be Q4, and then the incremental difference between average sales in Q4 and average sales in Q1, Q2, Q3. Now to show you that is very easy, and that's actually what I wanted to do here. So here are going to be, so here, I'll do this. Here's my average sales per quarter. And so Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate the average sales for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. So how do I do that? It's very easy. There's actually an average if command in Excel. So average if, there it is. Okay, so the range, the sales that I want evaluated, that's my sales. Oh, no, it's not. It's my quarter. And I went too far. Darn it. Right, because I just had the 5 years. The other stuff was my forecast. Don't include that. So I want that range evaluated, and I want it evaluated for my criteria. Well, this is quarter 1. Okay, so then I need my average range. That's my sales. Okay, so what this is telling Excel is this average if function says, look, take all of the ones in my range, right, because that's my criteria. So take all of the ones in this range and then average all of the sales that belong to a 1 in this range. So Excel is going to take 125 plus 118 plus 138 plus 109 plus 109 plus 130, and it's going to take the average of those 5 Q1 sales. And now it's going to get 124. Right, now bear with me. And then it's going to do the same thing for Q2. So watch this. Average if. Range. Criteria is 2. The average range. There's the 152. Okay? Same thing for Q3. So just bear with me. You know what I should do? I don't know why. Let me just make this easier on myself and on you by copying this across, and then I'll just change my criterias. What? Oh, sorry. I guess it would help if I anchor the right element there. All right, my bad. And then I got to copy it over one more. Okay, so here the criteria is 2, not 1. Here the criteria is 3, not 1. Okay, now notice, okay, so here are the average sales per quarter, and now watch. These are the exact, well, I actually can show them to you, because I put them over here. So what does my model predict in quarter 1? The average sales in quarter 1. What does my model predict in quarter 2? The average sales in quarter 2. Let me go down one more. Right, Q3, 121. Well, that's the average sales in quarter 3. And then, of course, in quarter 4, average sales are 95, right? So that's what this model is doing, okay? It's basically just calculating the average sales in each quarter. Now, it's not quite like that, because notice that what the model is actually reporting is the incremental difference, right, between Q1 and Q4, Q2 and Q4, Q3 and Q4. That's why I had to do this. If I want to know what my Q1 sales are, then I add up, the intercept plus the incremental difference in Q1 to get my Q1 sales. All right? So the point of all this, what I'm really trying to drive at here, is this, they call this a dummy variable regression. We're just applying the dummy variable regression to seasonality or to seasonal data, right? But all you're doing here is basically calculating average sales per time period. Okay? And hopefully this gives you an understanding of why you leave out one of my quarters, because that left out quarter becomes the so-called intercept, even though there is really no intercept here. Okay? All right. Well, I have rambled on for 20 minutes. I hope this makes sense. But this is a great regression to run when you are confronted with seasonal data. All right? And it certainly helps you forecast. Now, real quick, I know I said this before, but the seasonal model that we've just dealt with, it works just so long as you don't have a break or something funky happen in your data. So here, this is a great data set to model or to forecast, because it everything is the same. There's nothing funky going on, right? It's not like my average sales just popped up and then went flat again. If you see something like that, you would need to use a different model. Okay, well, that's it.